Hello and welcome to Absolute Trust Talk. I'm Kirsten Howe. I'm the host today, and we're happy to have you here listening to our live stream podcast. But before we get into our episode today, I'm going to go off on a little tangent about a real life example of estate planning in action. Our senior senator here in California, Dianne Feinstein, has been in the news a lot recently. Most of you are probably aware that there's been a lot of talk about Senator Feinstein's health, and in particular, her cognitive abilities, and some debate about whether she should step down. Related but separate from that, just in the last week or so, her daughter, Catherine, filed a petition on the senator's behalf seeking some sort of relief in probate court in connection with the senator's late husband's estate. And the fact that Catherine is acting on behalf of Senator Feinstein under a power of attorney has triggered a whole other round of discussion and speculation about the senator's capacity. And it's sort of that I wanted to discuss. So if you have listened to our podcast for a while, you know that incapacity planning is a big issue for us, and we take that very seriously. And you've also probably heard me talk about powers of attorney and how there are different types of powers of attorney. So there are springing powers of attorney, which only become effective when it is established that you have lost capacity. There are also immediate powers of attorney, which don't require any kind of finding of incapacity. And in fact, you have to have capacity in order to grant a power of attorney to somebody else. And it's not unusual for an older client to grant an immediate power of attorney to one of their children just to make things easier, not necessarily because they need help, but maybe they just would like some help. We also know that Senator Feinstein's husband died just last year. And it would not be unusual for her attorneys at that point to recommend that she update her power of attorney. That's what we often do with our widows and widowers, since he was probably the person named in her power of attorney. And for all we know, he had been handling her affairs for many years under that power of attorney because of her very busy schedule and the fact that she's away a lot. She's in DC a lot. And now I'm not taking a position on whether or not she has capacity, whether or not she should resign. And I haven't seen a copy of the power of attorney that Catherine is using. But I just am pointing out that the mere fact that her mother has granted her a power of attorney does not tell us anything about the senator's cognitive state. I'm going to just leave it at that. Okay, now on to our episode. So many of our clients are struggling with dementia, either as patients or caregivers. Being a dementia patient can be very isolating. Friends and family gradually become scarce, and many of the activities that make life fun and joyful are just become too difficult. And caregiving is a very difficult, never-ending, and lonely job. The worlds of the dementia patient and the caregiver can become very, very small and very joyless. But there's hope. Always there's hope. And I've said this before, I just love the episodes where I get to talk to and spotlight people who are doing really great things that benefit a lot of people. And today is a beautiful example of that. We're going to talk about a brilliantly simple model for a whole new way of helping people affected by dementia. My guest had the vision to create it in her community, and she's helped lots of other communities replicate it. And she's going to talk to us about how she did it and how you might be able to do something similar in your community. My guest today is Daphne Johnston. She is a founder and the executive director of Respite for All Foundation. She has a really long and impressive list of organizations and conferences that she's been invited to speak at, including the International Spirituality and Dementia Conference, the Council of Bishops Conference for the United Methodist Southeast Jurisdiction, the Florida Conference on Aging, National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center, American Society on Aging. I could go on and on and on, and they're just a very impressive resume. And we are so lucky to have her here, and so lucky that she somehow found time to talk to us. So, Daphne, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's exciting to be talking to your audience.
Oh, well, we're honored to have you. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get all of this started?
Well, right out of grad school, I had a master's in gerontology and public administration. I did 10 years of long-term care, ran memory care units at an early age. And I knew I loved people with Alzheimer's and dementia because, to me, they are probably the most honest people that we'll ever come across. I had people in independent living and assisted living that all they could do was complain. That was their way of control. But people with dementia somehow are probably the most grateful people that we can encounter. And I felt that at an early age. So I was fortunate. And after 10 years in long-term care, my senior pastor had asked me at our local church if I would feel like starting a dementia ministry. And at that time, I had 2 small children and I needed to get out of administration. And so I did. I started a local ministry in Montgomery, here from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. People could not believe that we were going to run a respite, it's not a daycare, but a respite day program from 10 to 2 with anywhere from 10 to 20. We got up to 25 participants, and we would have 10 to 20, 25 volunteers a day. Whatever we needed, we had. It was such a new idea. There were 2 or 3 in the Southeast that I went to go see, and I knew it could work, and I just pulled together what I thought could work for our local program, and it took off. And I haven't been able to keep up with it ever since. We've been doing this 10 years, and just recently founded a 501c3, the Respite for All Foundation. Nice.
And so your first respite program was in your town, Montgomery, Alabama, at your church, and
Correct.
Currently you have quite a few programs running all across the country that you've participated in helping them get up and running. How many and where?
That's right. Well, we let me just tell you how we got to the 501c3. So we did our local ministry here at our local church, and we had a Jewish family involved. We invite everyone, just any denomination, believers, no believers, gay, straight, black, white, everybody. Dementia is the all-time leveler of everything, right? And so our program was really based on our relationships and our fellowship. But the Jewish family had a daughter in Birmingham, Alabama, that said, why is this not in Birmingham? And so that was our idea, not to grow in brick and mortar, but we wanted to spread the volunteer model in every town, in every city. So we shared our budget, our brochures, all our paperwork, our model with Birmingham, and that's how we began to grow. And then fast forward 5 years later, we had a caregiver, Warren Barrow, whose wife had early onset at 48. She was with our program for 3 years. And I can't wait to tell you the difference between our day program and, say, any other model out there. But she was with me 3 years, and when she passed away in the parking lot of the funeral home, he just gave me the biggest hug, and he said, Daph, we have to take respite to every community. I want it all across the country. I'm going to give you $50,000. I'm going to make you start a foundation. And that was the day that we started from the funeral home parking lot. And fast forward, that was 5 years ago. We now have 27 programs across the country, 7 different states, and 6 denominations. And we're opening our first Respite for All community in Chapel Hill in 2 weeks. And that'll be at a senior center there in the Research Triangle. So the volunteer power is incredible. People just don't understand how easy it can be.
Well, and you just told me before we went on, before we went live, that you just got the go ahead for a new one. If you want to talk about that one.
That's right. We just got an email from Wisconsin. One of the churches have voted it in. You know, churches are based on church politics as everything else is, and it just takes a little while for committees to see the vision. But in our training and in our model, things are so easy because this is a social model of care. There are millions of people living with dementia that just need engagement. They don't need a medical model. They don't need nurses. They don't need more drugs. They need people, right?
Yeah, that's an important point that you just made, the difference between a social model and a medical model. One of the things that I really liked about what you described happening in your program is people aren't really so blatantly delineated as caregiver and patient. You know,
right.
They're volunteers and participants, and they're all kind of, you know, there's no difference really.
Right.
They're there to be together.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because one of our signature stories, right? I think we have grown so much because I'm just the girl down the street and I know how to tell a story. But these people have got such insight and such wisdom. And this doesn't grow because we know what to do with amyloid plaques. This grows because we know how to treat our neighbors, right? And so this lady had come in and she was in overalls and a big straw hat, and she had not signed up for that day. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what we were going to do, but she came in anyway, and she spent the day with us. She was a live wire, so much fun. And at the end of the day, we're all standing around, the volunteers, and we're all standing around, and she just says, wow. She slammed her hand on the table and she said, damn, this is just better than AA. And we were like, what are you talking about, lady? What are you talking about? And she said, look at this. She said, nobody cares what our last name is, and you're all just meeting us where we are. And it was just profound, you know. All of our name tags are just first names. There's no last names. There's no green smocks for volunteers. There's no different color shirt. Our motto is that we're all living with something. We have survived cancer, wayward children, financial woes, diabetes. Why do we single out people with dementia?
Right. Yeah. I really love that about the program, that everybody's treated the same and respectfully, and doesn't matter what role you are there to fill.
Right.
Describe a typical program. Like what is a day like?
So
and I know they're all different.
Yeah, they're all different, but we've kind of got the same structure. And so the typical day looks like you're in a host church. That church is, you know, invited others in from the community to be part, but you've got a big volunteer team. You've got the host church. And so at 10 o'clock, we began on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to 2. And so we've just got small talk, coffee, puzzles, just kind of piddling around the first, say, 20 minutes. And then we get into big whiteboard exercises like trivia, but really group conversation exercises, because we've truly seen a difference in people's communication skills when they can mirror other conversations. They really come back to life because they're in the flow of a conversation. It's very hard to do that when you're at home in a recliner.
With your one caregiver. Yeah.
Right, who's really busy doing 50 jobs.
Who's totally maxed
So we
out.
do a lot of group discussion, and then we get into exercise. It could be movement, yoga, weights. And then we get into our programming from 11 to 12. It's either art, music, service projects. So what we've landed on the last 5 years that's really set us apart, our volunteers really create opportunities for our friends with dementia to still serve their community, because you've got all these people like football coaches, retired CEOs, doctors, firemen, house mothers. You've just got all these wonderful people that have built their community.
They have a connection to other organizations.
And just because we've got some sort of memory challenge, that doesn't mean that we don't want to stop serving other people.
Right.
So how do we create an opportunity? And just for instance, we packed 250 bags of dog food and cat food to give to our local Meals on Wheels. They had seen their people were giving their food to their animals around the holidays, not having enough to do that. So we did a big drive. We pack cancer bags, snack bags for the cancer center. We have packed 200 diaper bags for young mothers. We find ways for our participants to be in the community. And I think that's so different than an empty activity, right? How do we create a space for people to still have dignity and people to still have worth in their community? So then we eat a hot lunch. We believed in a crowded table. We just take for granted the gift of relationships around the table. Mm-hmm. Because so oftentimes you've got a tray in front of you and a caregiver that is exhausted.
It's got to go do the laundry.
Right. Yeah. So the crowded table is something we celebrate.
That's
then we get into activities after lunch, and then we go home at 2. And the Respite for All Foundation, we take this model and we train our new churches, our new congregations, faith communities. We train them on this structure, and then we give them tons of ideas so that local director does not have to reinvent the wheel. Everything is provided for them.
Right. Okay. One of the things that you said to me that I love is that everyone involved, the caregivers, the participants, the volunteers, everyone benefits. Talk to me about how the volunteers benefit from participating in your program. And I know you have stories.
Right. I do. I've got a lot of stories. One story that comes to mind to illustrate this would be the story of Bibi and Eileen. And Eileen had Lewy body dementia for 9 years, could barely verbally communicate. She was really struggling, right? I mean, she was having a hard time. And our friend Bibi had just lost her husband. He was a physician that had just passed away. She was deep in grief. And she said, Daff, I need to come volunteer. I need to do something for somebody else. I've got to move forward. And so she came, and she and Eileen just became the best of friends. And it was their presence with one another that just really gave them a great relationship. And so one evening around Thanksgiving, I got a call, and Bibi, the volunteer, was crying, sobbing, and I thought something had happened to Eileen. And she said, Daphne, is it legal? Is it legal for a volunteer to eat Thanksgiving dinner with a participant? Eileen's family is flying in from New York and California, and they've invited me to Thanksgiving dinner. And you see, in that very moment, I recognized Eileen had truly become the volunteer. She had transformed the life of Bibi,
right,
simply by her presence and her vulnerability, her courage to be there. And so it really helps us reimagine what is the role of a volunteer, right? But our trained volunteers have had their lives changed as well, because it's a place to plug into your community where if you don't leave exhausted by the end of the day, I mean, they are so engaged. I love that they say they don't sacrifice their time anymore. They sit their time away to the side so they can go to respite because it's such a joy. It's not a sacrifice anymore. It's their joy. Mm-hmm. And I think our model provides that.
That is really great. Well, I think, it is a respite program, so it's probably easy for most people to imagine how the caregivers benefit. But I think that there are maybe surprising benefits to the participants as well.
Oh, yeah, right. In the very beginning, the whole mindset was we were going to create this ministry so we could have people to come and caregivers would have a break. And they would get that 4-hour break so they could, go do what they needed to do. And the other signature story we have is of Jack and Mary. And that first month, Mary brought her husband that had Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. He was the head of the chemical incinerator in Anniston, Alabama, through the Army. Brilliant man. He could barely communicate, but, he was okay being there, but she wouldn't leave him. And she didn't understand the volunteer model because it was so new. And so she wouldn't leave. And so after about 2 or 3 weeks, I had a volunteer, unbeknownst to me, go out, shake her in the hallway, give her a hug and say, Mary, we've got this. You've got to go. We've got this. And so Mary comes back in the room. We're all playing a game or doing something. And she just broke down and she said, Jack, I'm coming back. I'm coming back, my love, at 2:00. I love you so much. I'm not deserting you. I love you. And it was just a great example of the guilt and responsibility that caregivers carry, right?
Yeah.
She just had this breakdown and we were all watching in slow motion. It was like, oh my God, do I love my spouse that much? I don't know. This lady is just crazy. And that big old man, he was like 6'2". He turned around. Everybody was quiet in the room and he turns around and he looks at her and he says, goodbye. And we all just died laughing because in that very moment, we recognized that he needed the respite from her.
He needed a break from her intensity. Yeah.
So many of our initiatives are to give caregivers a break, which is well-deserved and needed. I'm not knocking it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But this program gives an opportunity for Jack, somebody living with Alzheimer's or dementia, to have a break from a strung-out caregiver.
Yeah.
Because, if you're living with somebody that's now doing 2 sets of doctor's appointments, 2 cars, the house, everything that they've never done, the dog goes wild, you get a leak, everything goes wrong. I just don't know how much joy they can provide. I mean, it's really hard, right? And so we recognize that we are the space of opportunity for both of them. But it was a twofold story. I got to tell the back end.
Okay.
Mary came back, and we were all so excited because Jack thrived, right? Jack stayed with us a whole nother year. But when Mary came back, I said, what did you do? What did you do? Did you go shopping? Did you go eat lunch with the girls? What'd you do? And she just gave me the biggest hug. And she said, oh, dear one, I went home and I took off my clothes and I sat with my bathrobe and a cup of coffee for the first time in my house by myself for 3 years. For 3 years, because you caregivers listening right now know when you need a break, you pay someone to come in your house and typically they sit. But you have to leave to get a break.
You have to leave.
What
right.
a gift for this lady to help me recognize, to be able to sit for, 2 hours by herself. I mean, it's just, you can easily take that for granted.
Yeah. To just have nothing but your own thoughts and
that's right.
a nice cup of coffee.
Just
that sounds
there. That's all I needed.
That sounds pretty great.
Yep.
Daphne, so this is run by volunteers. It's dependent upon volunteers. What is the volunteer onboarding and training process like?
Great question. Okay. So I think that there are many, many programs across the country. But what I have seen is sometimes they just make things so stinking hard. They just make it hard. And it doesn't have to be hard.
Right.
On a social model, it's like, we just need to do some awareness training, right? So we've got dementia communication. We've got some role play things that happen. We've got some dementia education, but we also go through our language. How are we going to build them up? How are we going to include them as an equal? Just common sense things that are condensed into a 3-hour training. 3 hours. Yep.
That's not bad.
Because you've got a trained director in every room, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got dementia trained, Red Cross, all that kind of stuff. But, volunteers just really need to get over their fear, because oftentimes we just fear what we don't know, right? And so
they don't necessarily know how to interact with someone who's
correct.
a little different.
It's our job to just teach them it is no different. You got to roll with the flow, value a dirty joke, celebrate it. What do we do in certain circumstances as opposed to the amyloid plaques? We make it easy, right?
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
So 3 hours. And I think another thing that sets us apart is we don't make our volunteers commit to every single Tuesday. I want your listeners to think back to all your volunteer jobs. It's really difficult when you've got to commit to 52 Tuesdays, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But when we train these volunteers in our training and you see a big volunteer pool, right? We train 20 to 30 to 40 volunteers when we begin to open. Everybody, we schedule 2 weeks out. And I tell people, if you need to take the summer off, go for it. If you need to travel in the fall, go for it. Because we've got a pool of volunteers that fill in. And the director has always got control over how many participants they have.
Yeah.
So nothing ever gets out of control. But I can tell you, we've been doing this 10 years, 28 programs, and nobody has ever closed for being short a day of volunteers. Once people experience this and the joy it brings,
they want to do it.
You'll never be short. You really create your week around your respite day. Truly.
Yeah, because you know you're going to get a boost of energy and just good feeling.
That's right.
So the idea being that if you have 10 volunteers on a given day, then you're going to have, I'm guessing, something like 10 participants?
Well, typically the hardest part, we think this is better than any drug in a bottle. I know it is. We're in studies right now, really trying to get some research evidence. But it just really works well at the beginning when we have 2 to 3 participants. This is the catch. We've got the best thing going. People don't understand the volunteer model. It's our job to educate them. And so you get 30 or 40 volunteers trained and you wind up with 2 participants, right? 2 to 5, let's say.
Okay.
I know God had me start this thing so small because I marketed for 3 months and the best idea ever and I had 2 participants. Mm-hmm. And I have to get the directors and the volunteers to see that those 2 lives are worth us being there. And it's going to grow. We can't stop because we start small, mm-hmm. right? And so we'll say we need 10 volunteers when we have 2 participants. Because you can't do any of the activities, you can't do the ball games, you can't do the service projects, you can't do the crowded table.
Yeah,
you can't do anything unless you have a crowd.
Yeah.
So in the volunteer training, it's such a mind shift from 1-to-1 volunteers, or you need 1 volunteer to 5 people.
It.
You need a ball game.
You need X number of people.
And I need volunteers to understand you're a part of the group. Don't walk away thinking, oh, she has so many volunteers, she doesn't need me. It's a different mind shift. And so when everybody's needed, because there's a lot of our 60, 70, and 80-year-olds that are living with a touch of dementia that are mm-hmm. fantastic volunteers. How do we put everybody to work? There are often times where we have to cut volunteers back because we just have too many. But the best ratio is 1.5 volunteers to 2 participants.
Got it.
If that makes sense. You don't want one-on-one because it's just too many people. A lot of times we have that. But to me, there's no other program in the country that has got the ratio of volunteers that we carry 4 hours a day, 2 to 4 days a week.
Yeah, it is very impressive. And so I know you are on a mission to spread these programs everywhere and anywhere.
Right.
And you've made some important connections with larger groups, larger organizations that will help you sort of amplify your ability to do that. What are you working on right now?
Well, I think we're to the level now in the foundation. We're almost 5 years old in the Respite for All Foundation. And now we're working with regional Episcopal dioceses. We're working with national Methodist outreach. We're working with the dementia specialists, 72 of them in the state of Wisconsin. We've really partnered up with Lifespan Respite in New York. We're trying to associate ourselves with larger networks as opposed to just one-on-one, right? And we're really seeing an uptick in growth by doing that.
Yeah, sort of more of a wholesale.
Right, that's right. We just want to get to the very top and say, how can you help us plant these seeds? We were very fortunate that the Author and Roop Foundation that's based out of Santa Barbara in California, Mr. Roop's wife had Alzheimer's, and he had such a passionate heart for helping caregivers and families living with Alzheimer's. They have recently given us a large grant to provide $10,000 seed grants to any new respite community that would like to do our training. So we've been very fortunate with private dollars to watch this model grow.
That's fantastic. And then, so I'm sure that, I want to say one more thing. You also, in furtherance of that mission, you've written a book. Tell us about your book.
I have. Well, let me show you, girl.
Yeah, it's showtime.
It's called The Respite for All, Reclaiming Joy Together. Reclaiming Joy Together on Amazon. But it was really written in the way I communicate. So you could probably read it in a day, but it's all of these stories and really the inspiration of why dementia-friendly communities are paramount. You know, there's 6 million people living with Alzheimer's and dementia right now. That means there's 6 million caregivers living with that. So that's a total of 12 million. And those are the people in statistics. So just think of the people not counted.
That aren't yet counted.
So I am 46. And in 30 years, I'll be 76. And there's a predicted 15 million people that will be living with dementia. You know, so oftentimes we get caught up in new drugs. And I hate to tell you, there's over 120 different types of identified dementias. There's never going to be a silver bullet. We will always live with some sort of dementia. And we cannot afford to put 15 million people in locked up long-term care. There's just no way the system's going to do it. So we have to find new ways to pivot, new systems in place. And I really think this volunteer model is really going to take over the country. It's just too easy because we're a social model. You don't have to have a medical staff. You don't have to break the back to see medical oversight. And you've got a free place to do it in a church. We teach the churches how to be community assets, because oftentimes they've got a paid building that's not being used. And we utilize that, teach them how to be a community outreach asset.
Nice. Okay, so I'm sure that we have listeners out there who are very inspired and want to get started. But let me just say, buy Daphne's book. Not right now. Wait till you're done here. But go on Amazon. You can buy the book. But what would you say are the basics that have to be kind of lined up before you really jump into this program?
The basics. Anybody listening right now, if you think, golly, I might could do that in our community, you want to identify a host church. You really want a mid-sized to larger size church, because the beauty of it is you've got hundreds of mission-minded people that really want to help their neighbor, if only given a vision of how, right? It's really hard to do volunteer work one-on-one with Alzheimer's and dementia because of the communication barrier. But when we have hundreds of mission-oriented people that want to help, you'll be amazed at how many volunteers. Therefore, you don't have to spend money on marketing, and you don't have to go pull teeth to get somebody to volunteer, because you're doing it as a group. So you want to get a host church for a multitude of reasons. You want to identify how you could get a food source. We want a hot lunch for every lunch. And then you really want to get a vision team together, just 2 or 3 people, and think, how could we possibly implement this? Working with that local church, who could be a part-time leader, because we're going to train that person. We're going to give that person every idea that we have, and we're going to let you make it your own local thing. We share our best practices. We are not legally tied to anyone. We just see a great model, and we want to give it to you guys to adjust to your own community. But I highly recommend you go to our website, respiteforall.org, and it's packed with videos, training videos, stories, bullet points on things you can identify on how to grow a respite community.
Nice. Okay. I'm going to turn to our audience questions and see what we've got there. Okay. I think you've answered this, but I'll ask it. Do you only work with Christian churches?
Oh, good question. No, we've started a program with the Jewish services, the Collat Family Jewish Services in Birmingham. Like I said, we're headed to Chapel Hill. We're going to start in a senior center. We're going to try this volunteer model in a senior center because they've got a rich volunteer base already. Right. You need free space to operate. and a rich volunteer base. We are not evangelical 4 hours through this day.
Right.
Our heart is we want to help our neighbor, right? And so we've got wonderful programming through the day, as I've mentioned. But then we also landed on a system of doing 2 optional chapel services a month, because we recognize that we want to have a worship service. We want families to be able to bring their loved one in jeans and a sweatshirt, for caregivers to come back early at 1:30 and be able to hear an 8-minute sermon. And if you knew how hard that was to get in the South, I just can't tell you. You can't get a preacher to talk for 8 minutes.
For 8 minutes.
But that's the magic number we aim for. So we do a lot of singing and there's a lot of joy, but it's optional, right? I mean, if somebody doesn't want to participate in that, they can go home early. So it's okay.
Yeah. It's not about evangelizing at all. It just happens to be in a church.
Well,
location.
We feel mission minded, and we feel that we want to share with our neighbor. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a good question. Do you charge money to the participants to come to your respite program?
So glad you asked that. Yes, we do. This model works because churches know it's sustainable. We have money. We have tuition money. I want you to think of like the daycare model, the mom's morning out model for kiddos, right? You only get quality leaders and directors and supplies and food because you have to fund it. And so we don't want to ask a host church to do this all for free, right? In Alabama right now, our home care average is $20 to $25 an hour for a sitter. I cannot fathom what it would be in California, New York, or in another market, right? But we charge, here we charge $40 a day. That's $10 an hour.
4 hours.
Right. Yeah. Probably about to go up. Our Birmingham programs have gone up a little bit just to cover food costs, but that's 4 hours of care, best medicine you can get, and a hot lunch. Yeah, so we turn nobody away, though. We do have a rule that if there is somebody that is just completely cannot afford it, we find a way to make it work. We've had so many donations, and all of our programs are so blessed with community grants and things. We just, we don't make it hard.
Nice. So you're able to offer scholarships.
So we offer scholarships. We say we've got resources, but it's that tuition that really offsets the cost. So we have a quality program.
Yeah. Okay. This last question I've got, I think, is kind of a little bit related to that. Does each program have some paid staff in addition?
Yes. We all have paid staff, and that's where those tuition dollars go for. We all have a part-time. You typically start off with a part-time. Some of the bigger communities have started with a full-time. But typically, you start off with a part-time director. And because she doesn't have to invent it, this was given to me. I had 2 or 3 mentors that were precious and giving me everything they had. We're going to give it to them, right? We've got a lot more resources now, but this is a minimal cost training program. Mm-hmm. And there's, no hooks, hidden ties or anything. But they all start somewhere part-time. I just can't give a number to it because you never know who's got a retired teacher in their community that they feel this is their mission. They're going to do this one day a week, right? There's somebody else that'll do it one day a week. But typically they start off on a paid position.
Okay. Very good. Daphne, I just can't really express how much I admire what you're doing and how incredibly important and necessary it is. And I just applaud you, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share you with my audience. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for what you do as well, because I am telling you, working 20 years with my friends with dementia and their families and leading support groups, what you were talking about earlier with your plan of action and your care, I can't express to your followers enough. Get your affairs in order, because you never know when a TIA is going to happen. You never know a small fall. And I've seen it with these families trigger horrific things. So thank you for what you do as well.
All right. Thank you. And to my viewers and listeners, thank you for being here. I'm sure you got a lot out of this. I know I did, and I look forward to connecting with you next time.
If you need help with your estate planning or administration, we also offer a free discovery call to help get the process started. You can find more information on booking your session by visiting absolutetrustcounsel.com/scheduling.